events of the War of 1812. Well, it starts with the Battle of Tippecanoe, which is actually before the 1812 declaration, but nonetheless. It includes the battles of the Great Lakes, which include the Battle of the Thames, Thames, the Battle of Put-in Bay, etc. How did we do in the battles of the Great Lakes? We did very well. We won. Because we had smaller boats that were quicker, and we destroyed the British Navy, which was, people were amazed. Then you get the sacking of Washington, D.C. The British came in and took over Washington, D.C. briefly, burned parts of the Capitol and the White House, and moved on to Baltimore, where we have the Battle of Fort McHenry, which is where Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. Okay? And then the final battle of the war is the one at the top of the next column, the Battle of New Orleans. Who was in charge at the Battle of New Orleans? Andrew Jackson, okay? And Andrew Jackson had the Americans dig in on the beach, and as the British got off their ships, they just shot them like little cherries off of a tree. And we won handily, okay? The effect of the War of 1812 on Native Americans, they lost it out. Any Native American left east of the Mississippi was forced or pushed west of the Mississippi, like a lot of them into Minnesota, Iowa, okay? The Hartford Convention. This is the last hurrah for the Federalists. In New England, they are celebrating America's losing this war because they didn't support the war to begin with, okay? So they get together at Hartford, the Federalists do, to make demands. Things like no two successive presidents from the same state. They're mad that Jefferson and then Madison were both Virginians. No second terms for any president. They look at the presidents up to the War of 1812 and they think, Jefferson, a Virginian, Washington, 2 terms, John Adams, a good Massachusetts man, 1 term. Jefferson, 2 terms, Monroe, or Madison, 2 terms, okay? He's on his 2nd term by now. And so they want to do that. They want to say that it takes 2/3 majority to declare war, etc. They come with, anyway, they make these 7 amendment proposals. They come to Washington in early 1815, or excuse me, early 1816 actually. And they come with their demands, and the news also arrives about the same time in Washington, D.C. that first and foremost, the Battle of New Orleans has been fought and won by the Americans, and secondly, that the Treaty of Ghent had already been signed. Okay? The war is over. This was the end of the Federalist Party. They run a man named Rufus King for president in 1816, but he gets very few votes. And from 1816 to 1824, we have the Era of Good Feelings, which we'll do in just a second. So what didn't the Treaty of Ghent do? It didn't end impressment. Okay, it was a status quo treaty. Did impressment end? Yes. The British on their own stopped doing it. They'd been defeated twice by a small little has-been country, or was-to-be country, and it was kind of humiliating. This would be like the United States beating the British in the American Revolution and the War of 1812 would be like every day you walk home from school and you see this 3rd grader and he beats you up, okay? A 3rd grader, an 8-year-old beats you up. That's pretty humiliating. So pretty soon you stop going home on that route, okay? That's what England chose to do. They just chose to end impressment, they left the force, and they stopped interfering with trade. Okay, the Era of Good Feelings went 1816 to 1824. What was it? Why is it an Era of Good Feeling? It's when there's only one political party. Everybody calls themselves a National Republican. It's the one and only time in all of American history that we have one political party. Okay? Chissonga Overture starts a slave rebellion in Haiti, and they end up winning, and before he can help set up a government, he's actually killed, but the people who are along with him set up a government made up of black men ruling in the island, on the island of Haiti. His revolt affected the United States how? It heightened or increased the fear of slave revolts. And then in 1831, they have Nat Turner's revolt, which was successful because some whites were killed, and that only adds more to the fear of slave revolts. The next two are hooked together. Intercontinental slave trade in the early 1800s and 1808 why an end to international slave trade. Okay, let's deal with first the 1808 why an end to international slave trade, because the Three-Fifths Compromise said so, which is part of the Constitution. Okay, intercontinental slave trade in the early 1800s, up until 1808, you could buy a slave from Africa, you could buy a slave from Bermuda, wherever. After 1808, you could not. It was not legal in this country. Missouri Compromise, what was it? The effect of it, a map of Maine, the provisions of. Okay, let's look at the provisions of it. Was it a provision of the Missouri Compromise that Maine be a free state? Yes. Was it a provision that there could be no slaves west of the Mississippi River? No. The Missouri Compromise said there could be no slaves north of the 3630 line, which is the bottom border of Missouri. Okay? Was Missouri a slave state, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. And was Oklahoma set aside for the Indians by the Missouri Compromise? No. Okay. So the three provisions are, Maine is a free state, Missouri is a slave state, and there can be no slavery north of the 3630 line. If they put a map on it, you should be able to recognize Missouri. I think Missouri is a very distinctive looking state, because to me it looks like a donkey with a hoof. There's that little hanging down part that looks like a hoof, which is the leg of the bottom leg of a horse, if you don't know that word. Okay? So if they're going to, if they ask you, if they've had a question a couple of times on when was this map made, and Missouri's a state, so if Missouri's a state, it's right after, you know, and everything else around it isn't, you know it's the Missouri Compromise, which took place in what year? 1820. Okay? The effect of the Missouri Compromise, it brings to the forefront the whole issue of balance of free state versus slave state, which is an issue that plagues the United States through the Compromise of 1850. So for the next 30 years, there's going to be an argument over should such and such state be allowed to come into the Union because it will be a free state or a slave state, whatever the case might be. It brings to the forefront the issue of Southerners want slavery everywhere. Some Northerners want it just confined to the South, other Northerners want it nowhere. And who has the right to dictate slavery? Can the federal government make that decision, or should it be left up to each state? So there are a whole bunch of issues wrapped into this compromise which become issues of the time. Okay?